You know, every time you tap past a paywall or get a breaking news alert buzzing on your phone, you're actually interacting with a 170-year-old legacy. Today in this explainer, we're diving deep into the wild evolution of the New York Times. We're going to see exactly how this global institution managed to survive violent mobs, massive political corruption, and, honestly, the ultimate existential threat, the Internet.
Right from their very first issue in 1851, which, by the way, was just 31 cents. Founders Henry Jarvis Raymond and George Jones baked a really complex dual DNA into the paper. Their original mission statement promised to be both conservative and radical, depending purely on what the public good required. For the 1850s, that was a completely novel approach to the news.
To see how they pulled this off, we're tracking 4 distinct eras: founding the Times, bribes and near bankruptcy, defining press freedom, and finally, surviving the digital age.
First up, founding the Times and the media landscape of the 1850s. Now, the media landscape back then was fiercely divided. Raymond actually cut his teeth working under Horace Greeley at the highly partisan New York Tribune. But armed with $100,000 in capital, he and Jones wanted to pivot. They deliberately positioned the Times as temperate and measured. They wanted to deliver straight facts, without all that raging temper of the Tribune. Which brings us to our second era: bribes, near bankruptcy, and the fight for survival. Because, as it turns out, claiming neutrality certainly didn't guarantee safety. During the 1863 draft riots, the pro-Union Times was literally under attack. Just picture this. You've got founder Henry Raymond personally taking to the streets to defend his newspaper row office, turning rioters away with early Gatling guns. And it actually worked. The mob just moved right along to attack the Tribune instead. Talk about high-stakes publishing, right?
$5 million. To put that into perspective, that's over $120 million in today's money. And that is exactly what the notoriously corrupt politician Boss Tweed offered publisher George Jones as a flat-out bribe to kill an unfavorable story. But Jones outright refused the cash. He published the expose anyway, completely tearing the lid off the massive ring of thieves running the city government. It's wild to think about, but this single act of journalistic integrity directly triggered the downfall of Boss Tweed's entire corrupt regime in the early 1870s.
The decades that followed were an absolute roller coaster. After both founders passed away, the Panic of 1893 pushed the paper to the very brink of collapse. They were bleeding $1,000 a day. But then, in 1896, a publisher named Adolph Ochs bought control for just $75,000. He came in and completely revitalized the operation. In fact, he pivoted them so effectively that by 1904, they were literally pioneering real-time wireless reporting from a boat during the Russo-Japanese War. Oh, and Ochs is actually the one who coined that legendary slogan, "All the news that's fit to print." He essentially used it as a weapon against fierce competitors like The World and The Journal, who were pretty notorious for their sensationalized, inaccurate reporting. Ochs really wanted readers to know that Times was the absolute gold standard, and honestly, that ethos is exactly why that slogan still sits on the front page today.
Moving on to era number 3, defining press freedom and battling the courts.
As the paper grew into this massive post-World War II global powerhouse, they ended up forcing the U.S. courts to answer a genuinely critical question. Just how far does the First Amendment actually protect the press? Well, the Times tested the absolute limits of that question. First, in 1964, the New York Times versus Sullivan case yielded a unanimous Supreme Court ruling. This was huge, protecting the press's right to report freely on the civil rights movement without facing crippling defamation suits. Then, in 1971, they boldly published the Pentagon Papers, which were classified Defense Department documents on the Vietnam War. When you look at them together, these two landmark cases essentially built the modern shield of American press freedom against government censorship. And that brings us to our final chapter, surviving the digital age and the ultimate threat of the Internet. So, despite defeating corrupt politicians and literally battling it out in the Supreme Court, their absolute biggest threat was the Internet. At the start of the 21st century, print circulation was riding high at over 1.1 million copies. But as we all know, online news began to take over, and the physical paper went into free fall. We're talking plummeting down to just 374,000 copies by 2020. But here is the incredible plot twist. They didn't just sit back and let the physical paper die.
By building their own smartphone app back in 2008 and aggressively pushing digital subscriptions, they completely rewrote their business model. By late 2020, they had captured over 4.6 million digital-only subscribers. They essentially proved to the entire industry that digital news could, in fact, be successfully monetized.
So it really leaves us with this final thought. Having survived literal mobs with Gatling guns, $120 million bribes, near bankruptcy, and the harrowing cliff of the digital revolution, how will this historic institution continue to adapt to the relentless pace of tomorrow's technology? The medium is definitely going to keep changing, but it seems pretty clear that the need for all the news that's fit to print isn't going anywhere anytime soon.